Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this course, INR 2002. And today we, start focusing on Module 11, Part 1. Module 11, Part 1 is going to focus on two different chapters. One is Chapter 24, which focuses on the warfare. And the next video is going to focus on Chapter 28, which is about terrorism and political conflict. Okay, let's start with, Chapter 24. And Chapter 24 is basically, talking about contemporary warfare. So of course the instructors over there, or they're better to say your textbook writers, they have tried to have a little bit of a historical background, but I have noticed some material missing over there, and some in the years past it has caused some trouble for some of my students. So I would, as usual, I would interject some other ideas to make the material a little bit easier for you to digest. So let's go, now that we have covered with at least slide number 1, the heading. Now let's go into the learning objective, slide number 2. And in that regard, basically a summary of this chapter is we start with the whole notion of the new wars, is that right? New wars paradigm, as suggested by one of the British scholars. Then we talk about the criticism of that idea. So there are a lot of, as you can see, a lot of political scientists and international relations scholars. They come up with new ideas, new concepts, new theories, new methods, and then there are always criticism of everything because nothing is perfect. Is that right? Okay, and then we talk about the new technologies and the new warfare, and then we conclude. So what does it mean in terms of your learning objectives and what you should, remember and understand? You should remember the meaning and the nature of war. Is that right? It's a major problem in international relations. The ideas of the old wars and the new wars, if there is a difference between the two, and also the connection between globalization, failed states, and contemporary conflict is important. And last but certainly not least, you should know something about the key technological development that are affecting the warfare nowadays around the world. Okay, I like to start, and I think most of the lectures usually by different professors start about warfare. They at least cite Karl von Clausewitz. He's a very, very significant person, because in the 19th century he wrote a book called On War, and this is, of course, the book was published in 1832. That's why I say 19th century. Is that right? This has become basically, how should I put it, a modern classic for people who would like to learn more about war. All right, so what are some of the ideas that he presented right there? Basically, that the war is the act of force to, compel our enemies to do what we want. Is that right? Now, kind of close to the definition of the concept of force that we had, if you remember in Module 0. You remember when I was distinguishing between the concept of power and force? Power is an ability to persuade, and force is basically actual use of violence. Well, here we go. That's force being used in a war. And the next notion is the central aim of war is to defeat your enemy on the battlefield. Okay? That is very important. That's what every general and every soldier knows. However, war does not exist in an isolation. It has political reasons. It has political dimension. And that's why it's very important to understand the policy dimension of that. Now, having said that one of the major centers, academic centers in our country, focusing on the notion of causes of war and factors like that, deals with what? It's at the University of Michigan. At the University of Michigan, they have a center called Collaterals of a War, and for short, the abbreviation is COW. I remember once I kept using the term, abbreviation COW, and the students, they were kind of confused. Wait a minute, I thought we were talking about international relations. What do you mean by COW? And I forgot that, oh my gosh, these are undergraduate students. I have to mention what, the project is all about. This project was basically championed for a number of years by the late Professor David, Singer, who was actually one of my, professors from, mentors of some of my professors in Arizona. And I was supposed to actually go to do studies there for my PhD. But in Arizona, all the way up to the master's, I learned a whole lot about the methodology. And they suggest that if I want to have a balanced education, I should go to a school which is more theory oriented. So that's why I went to Virginia. But still, Michigan is very famous in that regard. The project is still there. They're still producing a lot of material. There are a number of people they work with it with that project. Okay, so in terms of the definition that they would have, simply they say, definition of war would be, as long as it hits the threshold of 1,000 battle related death, that conflict could be defined as a war. Now remember, this is about a project that deals with quantitative factors, so obviously they would have those type of qualification for the. But of course, this brings a lot of notions from a perspective of other political scientists. People, they say, well, isn't that an arbitrary number? How about if it's only 990? Okay, is that a war or not? And then they say that how about if it's a higher number? How about if it's a lower number? So these are the questions that it comes about. Also, they talked about, they say that it has to be direct, the death has to be directly related to the battlefield. What about the indirect, ones? Like, for example, as a result of that one, bombing, this and that, what happened was a number of people, they got injured, but in different places, and then by the time they got to the hospital, they died. Or it creates a famine, and as a result of that, a lot of people die of hunger. So as you can see, these issues are flexible. Remember, we are studying human behavior, okay? I'm not teaching you physics or chemistry, that is very, very clear, that, oh yeah, mechanically, if you push this wheel, this wheel does that, or, for example, if you drop this way, because of the gravity of the, our planet, and this is how we measure it, and this is how much it weighs. You see, I mean, that is very, very clear cut. Or chemistry, you put this type of acid over that type of metal, and it produces this type of salt and that type of water. We are studying human behavior. You can study, twin brothers or twin sisters, is that right? They look alike, and they react to things in different ways. That's just the nature of human being. Okay, I want to make sure that you consider that. Now, having said that one, we're still looking for pattern behavior, though. We're still looking for how most people react to that particular issue, and that is important. Okay, let's go to slide number 5 now. All right, so we finished 4. 5 basically talks about types of war. So in that regard, let me mention a few, concept, and then I just give you a definition. I actually put the, very, very super duper, definition for each one, like interstate war, is that right, which takes place between states. Intrastate wars that happens within the states. Civil war would be one of it. Is that right? Total war. That would be total mobilization of a society, for a war. Like, for example, right now, the Ukrainian war. Is that right? Ukrainian war from the perspective of Ukrainians who are putting everything they have. Is that right? Even though most of the war is in the eastern side of Ukraine and southern side of Ukraine, guess what? The western side is getting attacked from once in a while with bombs and rockets and everything. The central part of it gets attacked. The southern part of it gets attacked. The southwest of it gets attacked. And they have put everything they have into defending themselves. So from the perspective of Ukrainian, the war is a total war. Now, what about from the perspective of the Russians? From the perspective of Russian is considered the next one, limited war, because they're using mostly military and they have some limited, goals over there. You see what I mean? So that would be a case. Then there is the conventional war, which is fought by usually professional and organized armies and militaries or something. This is as opposed to guerrilla warfare, which is usually uses smaller but looser, organized or irregular forces. Okay. By the way, many of the typical states, they usually use conventional warfare, while, for example, the weaker side, they use what? Guerrilla warfare. A very good example of it is, as you know, as of October 7th, 2023, there was a surprise attack by Hamas against Israel. Well, Hamas group was acting like a what? Guerrilla warfare. The Israeli response to that one has been basically a traditional conventional warfare. Is that right? Okay. So I'm giving you these real examples because I want you to be updated. I mean, I chose you a very updated book, but at the same time, it's important in political science, international relations, that you would know exactly, the stuff we talk about, it's really happening in the world. It's not like we are sitting over there and be discussing, oh, Plato 2,000 years ago said something, oh, Aristotle said something different, and I don't know. No, we are talking about real stuff affecting people's life on everyday basis right now at this very moment. Okay, contemporary wars. Notice slide number 6. I want you to take a look at it. I'm hoping that you, when you're listening to my, or watching my videos, you're actually taking a look at the slides. I get dry mouth all the time. Okay, so a major post-Cold War trend has been a decline, actually, of interstate wars. So there are a lot less. I'm not saying that there's none. That's not true. Is that right? But there is a lot less, wars between states as opposed to with what. As opposed to other elements. And we should give we should give a little bit of credit to international diplomacy, and believe it or not, we should give a little bit of credit to UN. I know that UN is being criticized from right and left, is that right? But let's face it, they have really tried to play a very positive role right here. Another thing we should say is, of course, this doesn't mean just because their number has decreased, it doesn't mean it's the end of the wars among states. There are still a lot of different crazy things happening, unfortunately. So this has led also some writers to suggest that the contemporary wars are kind of different from previous wars, okay? And that leads us to that notion I told you earlier, the new wars paradigm, okay? So let me say a few words right now. Let's go to slide number 7, and let's say a few words about that one, because right now that's the one that is catching a lot of attention. This thesis is associated basically with Professor Mary, Kaldor, okay? She's a British scholar, and she's written a book called The New and the Old Wars, Organized Violence in a Global Era. It was published in 1999, okay? And since then, for the last 24 years, what has happened is a lot of people have paid attention. Some people like her terminology, some people don't like her terminology, some people are neutral, okay? So I wanted to give you some ideas like what this is about, because this is supposed to be a hot topic right now, okay? Her argument is that the contemporary wars are basically different from the type of wars that we have seen in the 19th and the 20th century, and we have seen all the way up to the Cold War. And they are actually very, very also different from Napoleonic wars or the World War I or World War II. So these wars are different because, of their nature and the way it's done. And that's why I suggest that there should be a completely new category. Now, what does that mean, these new wars? It's a term, as I mentioned, that this professor has used, and it basically refers to certain characteristics. So I'd like to mention at least 4 of these characteristics for you. I organize it for you on, slide number 8. I hope that, you follow this. Is that right? One characteristic is the violence between a combination of states and non-state actors. So it's not always just states. Some non-state actors, they get involved. Is that right? So that's one aspect. The other one is fighting in the name of identity politics versus just an ideology. Like during the Cold War, a lot of things, we are communists, you are capitalists, we are fighting. Is that right? But nowadays, a whole lot of it is dealing with identity. A lot of people, for example, that they fight for, a whole notion of who is Muslim, who is Shia, who is Christian, who is that, who is this ethnic group, who is that ethnic group. These are all new concepts. And as you notice, your book has examples for it. I'm giving you some examples here and there. All right. The next one is attempt to achieve political rather than just physical, control of the population. In 19th century wars were very, very simple. Look at, for example, what Napoleon was trying to constantly do. Is that right? He was trying to control territory. In those territories, there were people. So he was just trying to control, in a very, very physical terms, territory and people. Okay? Nowadays, a lot of wars are politically oriented. It's like the part of the agenda of the parties is to convince the other side that we are right and you are wrong and you should follow us. And you see what I mean? They do not necessarily care about territory as much, but so you can see the nature of it is different according to what she says. And then last but not least, conflict was basically financed in the old time only by the state. Is that right? Okay, so there is a war, so the state is paying money for, of course, the soldiers, for all the weapons, for all the ammunition, you see? And sometimes states, they run out of ammunition and they ask other people. Look at, right, for example, again, back in Ukraine situation. Is that right? Ukraine every day spends like hundreds and hundreds of drones and thousands of what you call it, ammunition here and there for their guns and for their big guns, the little guns, etc., etc. So where have been getting it? They've been getting it for their neighboring countries in Europe, that they all want to make sure that Ukraine doesn't lose this, because they think that if Russia wins, then what's going to happen is Russia is going to focus on them. You see? So we have, of course, as Americans, we've been helping Ukraine too. You know that one. Is that right? All those bills are going to our Congress in the last 2 years, since February 24th of 2022. Is that right? By the way, that was one of the reasons I chose this book for you, because there were a lot of other IR books, but guess what? Many of them, they wouldn't even talk about Ukraine. They were all, the last edition was 2020. So, and I had to make a decision for this class this past summer. So the newest one was this one, which came out April of 2023. So it was the most updated one. But again, by nature of the books, they become outdated very quickly. And that's why I keep adding examples to my lectures. All right. So the new war, right now, we are on slide number 9. The new war thesis here, there are some major elements. And I want to emphasize these major elements. One major element, according to your authors, is globalization. They consider it to be one of the major causes of modern wars, because it causes inequality, causes, grievances, etc., etc. The other aspect of it is the civilian. The civilians are the main casualty of the war nowadays. It's like, for example, in the war right now, look at what is happening, for example, since October 7 of this year, when Hamas attacked Israel. Is that right? I'm sure the Hamas leaders, they knew that you're going to attack Israel. Israel is going to say, oh, thank you so much. We were going to forgive you. No, they're going to come back. They're going to come back after you. But what happened? What has happened is, while 1,400 Israelis have died during the obviously Hamas effects, and then about 200 Israelis and foreign citizen were kidnapped and taken back to Gaza. In the last so far, because we are talking today, is that right? November, basically 2nd of 2023. As of today, according to NPR and more reliable sources, at least about 8,000 Palestinians have died. Well, we all know that all these 8,000 Palestinians were not part of the guerrilla warfare. Many of them were what? Just ordinary citizens, as you can see here and there. The reason I'm bringing this example to show you that even when, not just a state, but also a non-state actor participate in this one, what are they going to do? They're going hiding here and there, and when the outside, forces, they come in and they bombard and this and that, as a result of it, there are usually more civilians dying as opposed to what? As opposed to military or even what? Irregular forces of the enemy. So that is, in that regard, the text is right. And then last but not least in this regard, when they're talking about the main element that is on slide number 9, is the failed states. And these are places which are lawless, and state is unable to constrain violence. So continuation of this whole notion of the new wars and the major elements is, we need to go to the next slide, okay? The next slide, this is slide number 10. In that regard, non-state actors, these are irregular forces, is that right? Like Hamas forces. I know that they said that Hamas was basically running Gaza, is that right? But Hamas doesn't have Gaza is not a state, okay? And even in the West Bank, where there is what they call the Palestinian Authority, from international law perspective, is not a state, okay? It is what? It is a non-state actor. Because a state, you remember, we defined that one at the very beginning of the semester. Those 5 characteristics of the state. State is a political/legal entity that has population, a clear territory, clear government, has independence or sovereignty, and last but not least, has diplomatic recognition. If it's missing some of those, that Palestinian Authority and the rule of Hamas in Gaza have, which is what? Complete independence. They don't have independence. Why? Because their territory is occupied by Israelis, and Israelis have not given them independence. Is that right? If you don't give them independence, they're not independent. They can declare themselves independent, but in reality, they're not. And then also they need to have a diplomatic recognition from other countries in the world. Some countries have, some countries haven't. So that's one of the reasons that these non-state actors that your author is talking about, I agree with them, they are very, very important player nowadays. Next one is identity politics, that a lot of these fights are not over ideology like before, it's over identity. Ethnic identity, religious identity. These are very important. And last but not least is they call it privatization of war, which basically they're referring to private actors like, security forces, like mercenaries or something that would contribute to this. Now, having said that one, now let's go to the criticism of this idea. And this one comes from, different angles, First of all, in terms of overall, a lot of people, they say that there's nothing new about these new wars that this professor is talking about. It sounds very much like the old one, because if it walks like a duck, looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, most likely it's a duck and it's not an elephant, okay? So that's one of the things they focus on. The next notion is the historical root, okay? So in that regard, they say that many of these, the professor has identified as new wars, they really have had historical, roots. They've been related to similar situation in the past. So it's not as new as what is claimed. And many of these, historical root goes back to either colonialism or Cold War or something. Then the next notion is identity, politics. And in that regard, as I mentioned here, they say that historical wars often fought in the name of religious, ethnic, or national causes, just like what the Nazis did in Germany. Is that right? And, they brought World War II to the whole world. What are some of the other criticism right here? The other one is associated with the notion of failed state, which causes state failure, have also had historical roots. Again, this is not a new thing. Historical root of it goes back to period of colonialism when these territories were under power of some colonial power. Next one is brutality. Okay. Horrific, violence has always been a part of war. What's so new about that? Look at right now, for example, pictures of how we see, for example, Ukrainians dying. Is that right? When a rocket comes out and hits a school. Is that right? A Russian rocket comes over there, it's a school. I mean, you've seen it in on the different channels and everything else, or on internet, if that's the way you're getting your news. What's so new about that? It's killing, the kids. Or, for example, hits a hospital or hits a community center or a bunch of old people sitting over there. They don't have any gun to protect themselves. Is that right? So this is what you need to consider. We see, by the way, the same thing obviously in Gaza too. Just different, partners. One is Russia, Ukraine. The other one is Israel and what, And I think it's important to separate really Hamas from Palestinians, because not all Palestinians are like Hamas. And by the way, they didn't have, since they chose Hamas more than 2 decades ago. Is that right? They haven't had the opportunity to even vote, because Hamas basically canceled all the elections and everything, because I guess they know that they're not so popular even in their own territory. So brutality we talked about. Last but not least, again, non-state actors here. And here, as I mentioned, there's been always presence of mercenaries. Sometimes the governments or people, you hire tribes or other groups to do that. Now, here we come to the next slide, and this is slide number 13, focusing on technological development. One thing certainly for sure about the new war is that modern technology has really transformed the battlefield, okay? And in fact, sometimes people are kind of wondering and say, why is Russia fighting the wars like this one? They're building trenches, they're putting mines. This is like, a World War I or World War II type of war. You have all those tanks and this and that. Why don't they do something different? Is that right? So sometimes you could use that old technique, but at the same time, remember, right now, Russia and Ukraine, they both are using a lot of what? Drones. Is that right? They're using a lot of drones. Some of them are using a little bit more sophisticated, like, for example, robots or something. So battlefield has been changing. Or, for example, we're going to talk about this one in a few minutes. They attack each other through cyber, is that right? To paralyze, for example, the electric system, or to paralyze the GPS system or whatever. So the wealthy state, they usually invest quite a bit of money in these modern technologies, because it, first of all, gives them military advantage over their opposition. 2, it reduces their human casualty. You don't want as much human casualty, because it's going to cause the support that you have from your own people is going to decrease. Last but not least, in this regard, we should say that technological superiority does not necessarily guarantee you're going to win. Is that right? Example, Russians had technological superiority when they were in Afghanistan, when they invaded Afghanistan. Is that right? They were there for quite a while, for a decade or so. Did they win? No, they lost. What about us us Americans in Vietnam? We had technological superiority. We still what? From many military perspective, they said, well, we were forced to withdraw, basically. Is that right? So it doesn't guarantee you're going to win. So last but not least slide that I have organized for you here is slide number 14. And that one deals with what? Cyber warfare. Again, as a part of what? This technological development. So cyberspace has become a major battlefield in the 21st century. Okay? For a number of reasons. Okay? Because cyber warfare has many advantages. It provides basically relatively a cheap way of warfare. Is that right? You need a computer. We need a couple of very, very good hackers. Is that right? And then you can do whatever they can do for you. It does also keep the hackers, like for example, soldiers are constantly in the what? In the field, they're in the danger of being shot at. Is that right? Well, hackers, what are they going to do, They're sitting in a some protected room or something with a bunch of devices and everything. So the chance that something happened to them is a lot less. And there is also difficulty of identifying exactly who has been doing this, naughty things. Is that right? Who is in the Santa's naughty list right there in that regard? Last but not least, we can say that it has been used to attack states, networks, infrastructure. It has been used for ideological purposes, and also sometimes it has been used to, pass around lies and disinformation. And that is very, very important in what nowadays 21st century warfare. All right. Well, I went over a lot of material for you. I hope that, the lecture has helped you to digest the material a little bit better. I really hope that you're really watching all these PowerPoints that I put all the effort into it. Okay, and then you watch it as I'm covering them, and hopefully you're taking notes and everything, and that would make it a little bit easier. Because as you've seen, a lot of the questions are coming from what? My lectures and the PowerPoints. All right, as usual, if you have any kind of questions that you feel like hasn't been answered, or if you have difficulty with something, just email me. All right, thank you.